The first person I'd like to introduce is Dr. Aruna Sarma. She got her bachelor's degree and master's in health administration at Indiana University, and then she subsequently went on to obtain her PhD in epidemiological sciences from the University of Michigan. Then she did her postdoctoral training at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, and then she returned to the University of Michigan as faculty member in urology. She now is chief and professor of the Dow Division of Health Services Research in the Department of Urology, and she's research professor in epidemiology as well. In addition, related to the CAIRIBU, she's co-PI of the CAIRIBU K-12 KUroEpi program at the University of Michigan. Her main research interests are in the epidemiology of benign urology, neurological complications of diabetes, and racial disparities in benign prostatic hyperplasia and prostate cancer. Dr. Sarma, thank you so much for joining us, and we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, first of all, Christina, for inviting me to present. I have a couple slides because even though networking is one of these sort of philosophical concepts in terms of behavior, if you have to sort of put in a category, perhaps behavioral, when I first came on, as was sort of mentioned, I'm a PhD, I'm an epidemiologist that landed in the Department of Urology at Michigan. And so it became very clear to me very quickly that I had to begin networking and introducing myself and ingratiating myself into this department and field very differently. And it wasn't happening naturally because I was coming from a very different science and field. And so I really actually went online and started looking up on how to network and what to network. And there's a whole science on this that I'm not going to go through now, but it was actually really helpful to just sort of get some nice hard points and metrics on things you should think about. And so I kind of wanted to just present some of that as talking points, as I know the other panelists will have plenty to say on that, but I thought I could present just, why we even want to network, some specifics on how to actually do it, and things that we should be thinking about while we maintain that kind of networking behavior throughout our career. So in terms of why is it important, obviously all of us know it's important, but specifically, it certainly helps your scholarship. I think that's going to happen throughout your career. And so it's always going to be important that your contribution to the knowledge is always understood to be dependent on the work of others as well. So it's a team-based approach. It's just the nature of our field and our science. And while we can all do a lot on our own, networking just improves the quality of everything that we do, especially if it's done well. And at the end of the day, as much as we concentrate on metrics, and many of us, you're starting out, we've got to get papers published, you've got to get grants funded for promotion. At the end of the day, research is not for your own personal consumption. You're doing this to inform the science and others on what you're learning. And so you have to really develop a skill set to promote your research and encourage people, to be engaging in it. And sometimes that's a harder sell in some areas than others. I have found that in my field, it was a very big sell. It was a hard sell. I was kind of going into an area that people hadn't really thought about, and I had to really think about the audience and how to do that. Networking is required just in terms of what we do. It's absolutely necessary. It increases the expectation of collaborative team science over the last decade. It really necessitates the fact that we have to be working with others and networking well for this to be successful. And of course, research can be lonely. For many of us PhDs, those who are in the lab, or, for me on the computer, I can spend my entire career sitting in front of a computer screen and not engaging with anybody, and could reasonably get a lot done. But, that's really not the way that we should be behaving as human beings, as well as the fact that I think it's just not good for you. Interaction is natural, it's important. And I think the networking aspect can certainly improve mental well-being without a doubt. And I think it's important that we develop the skill set to do that. So what are the practical steps? I mean, there's a lot of things that you can do to engage in mentoring. I'm sure all of you have been given this advice, but when I saw this sort of written out in some papers talking about networking, it became a checklist. And I think it's important to really, set these standards down and make sure that you're actively engaging. And so these are the 4 things that I think can be really helpful. And I would say take the time to see if you can address each of these four things in one way or another or the other. First thing, obviously, and this is very amenable to a lot of our fields in our career, but join an association or society. And lucky for us, we have to present our science at these meetings, at association meetings or society meetings. So that's not difficult to do. But it's important that you don't just join it and just go to a meeting. Don't be a passive member. I think it's very important to really get in there, learn things, talk to people. As I said, I was a PhD epidemiologist. I fell into the field of urology. It wasn't something that I had planned on going into per se. I'm a methodologist, so it can be applied to a lot of things. I had to really learn about urology. And so when I went to the meeting, it was taking courses, going to every session that I thought was important. It was talking to the speaker, asking questions. I think it was important that you be active and not just passive. It is very easy to go to these large conferences, sit in a room, hear about what's going on and not speak to people. But I think there's a level of engagement that happens with the science and with individuals when you're far more active. So I think that's important. So getting involved, engage, go to panels, ask questions, introduce yourself. I will tell you on this side of the career and my lifespan, it's lovely to have people come up to you, tell you their name and tell you where they're coming from and what they're interested in. We do like that. And then that's actually, initially I was very intimidated to do that, but I find that, it helped a lot. People put a face to the name, and it's a way to socially engage, and people do remember those kinds of interactions. So I think it's important to do that. Ask questions. No questions are ridiculous. I know it can be daunting, but I think if you frame it in the right way, I think it's always easy. I was lucky. I could say, I'm an epidemiologist. I don't know anything about what you guys do. Can you just explain to me why this works this way or why you do what you do? It's disarming, and it was a way to get to know people at a level that was comfortable for me. So I think, make the effort to do that. As I said, when I first started, going to workshops and classes. So anything I didn't understand, I took a class. And I would still say, not being a clinician, 75% of it is still, Latin to me. It's not something I always get, but it's important to show up. And it was exciting when I did hear a term that I recognized. It was great to come out of there and say, okay, I didn't get 50% of it, but the other 50% I got, and it made sense. That was a win. So be strategic about taking these workshops and classes to help learn about things that you're unfamiliar with. It's a good way to get to know the people that are in the field, and a good way to get taught by the experts. Rather than just reading. Active learning, I think, can be very helpful. And this is something I'm still struggling with just because of age. And I think a lot of you will probably do this far better, but I think developing a social media presence is becoming increasingly important. And I think you have to think about what it is you want to do and say and what your goal would be. But I have found that people are far more likely to engage with you when they think they know you, and they think they know you when you have a social media presence and they hear your thoughts on ideas. And I think it has facilitated interaction a lot more easily than I think it used to be, where it required perhaps a handshake. This may be a way to familiarize people a little bit sooner in the process, and I think that can be useful. So as you're kind of doing these things, I think you want to remember a couple of things. First, don't confuse networking with all boys networks. There's a lot of comments that I have received from fellows and trainees of, well, I'm not really involved in them. They're friends and they go back 20 years. Networks are closed to a few, but, networking is supposed to be voluntary. It's supposed to be open, and it's based on reciprocity. So take the time to kind of get in there and see if it's something that feels like it can be opened up. They're not the same thing. So it doesn't have to be that you have to be a member of a society or something to do this, but it's okay to ask whether or not you can get involved in some way. So really try and figure out what one does versus the other, and encourage the networking, the open aspect of it. You have to be willing to be giving and taking, I think, in this. So sharing your successes and contacts and appreciation is important. You want to learn from people, but you'll always have things to offer as well. And I think that that's going to be important in the process. Start early, absolutely start early. You have a whole career ahead of you, and you're going to be developing these networking opportunities as you go, but they have more and more impact as you learn and as you grow. And so starting early can be helpful for you. And again, don't leave this up to chance. You don't need someone to necessarily introduce you. You go through the process and be thoughtful about it. Go to the meetings, go up to the podium, shake someone's hand, introduce yourself. So think of what's going to be realistic for you to be able to do. Don't wait for it to happen. I think being active is very important, and proactive is being really important. And one thing I think I would like to emphasize here is don't focus just on the high level context. I mean, people, I think, wait for introduction to the chair of the division or department, or they want to meet the dean of something. You know, there are a lot of people in your field at your level, you know, starting out, that are going to be just as important in your career. And so I think making contacts with everybody, you know, at all different levels is important. You don't stand alone in research, you work with people. And so having really good contacts at your stage of your career is going to be just as important as part of your networking. So it's not all about, you know, who you're trying to get to know higher up, but having a broad sense of understanding people and getting to know them. Think about your common goals. So I think you don't always have to agree with people, when it doesn't mean that they shouldn't be important in your network. I think at the end of the day, networking is based on respect and esteem, and you may not agree with someone's approach or their thoughts on the science, but you can appreciate how they got there. And so I think having individuals in your network, or putting yourself out there for people who you might not otherwise think would be helpful, I think is something you should think about as well, because that really does just develops an outlook that appreciates all points of view. Working on your communicative and social skills. Networking doesn't come easy to everybody, especially if you're an introvert. It's not, and a lot of us as scientists, as I said before, we can kind of sit in our labs and behind our computers and get a lot done, but this requires practice. So if you're not used to it, practice. That's all it takes. Maybe you start small and you keep going, but it's important to develop it. And again, you got to just keep doing it, practical steps. So you just, you know, I try in the very beginning, I would actually outline, go through the abstract book, figure out what was going on, which sessions, which things, and I kind of circled people I wanted to really meet and actively went to those sessions. The goal being, can I just introduce myself, say where I'm coming from, what I'm doing, that I appreciate their work. If there's some time in the future that I could touch base with them to learn more, you know, and if that was all that was, that's fine, but make that a check box that you can fill with each meeting. So come up with you know, plans and steps that you think you can achieve as you go through the process. So, you know, I know that's a lot of sort of very logical things, but it was nice to kind of see it written out and realize that they can be very strategic. And so I think be purposeful in your networking. You want to map it out and plan it out. You don't wait for it to happen. This is something that you can put on your things to do and your to-do list to get done. I think it does require an active presence. So I'll kind of leave it there. I know that that's sort of a lot of bullet points, but maybe it can be a starting point on our discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Sarma. That was very interesting. Next, we have Dr. Lisa Karstens. She obtained her PhD at Princeton University, and she subsequently went on to get her master's in biomedical informatics at Oregon Health and Science University. Dr. Karstens is an assistant professor at Oregon Health and Science University in the Department of Medical Informatics and Clinical Epidemiology and Obstetrics and Gynecology. Her current research focuses on using bioinformatic approaches to understand bladder disorders, and she specifically focused in that on understanding how the human microbiome contributes to bladder health and disease.
As an interdisciplinary scientist, networking has played a key role in my career development, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to share some of my tips and experiences about networking with you all today. So here I have listed some of the common reasons people think about networking, and it's typically when we need something, when we need to take that next step in our career, whether it be as a student, postdoc, fellow, or faculty, or when we need to recruit talent into our research groups or onto our teams. And we also tend to think about networking when we need external expertise on a specific project. And these are all very valid reasons for networking, but they tend to be very need-based. And also, if we wait until these needs arise, it'll likely be too late to really network effectively. So there's several other reasons that we also want to network that are not necessarily need-based. And this includes this includes exchanging ideas, which is essential for science, broadening our knowledge, whether it be about a specific topic or about different types of careers or paths that we might want to take our education. We also network to potentially provide opportunities to ourselves or to others in our network down the road. And we also want to network in order to make acquaintances and forge collaborations and even possibly professional friendships. Now, importantly, networking is an ongoing activity, and you never really know when a connection that you make will be beneficial to you or to someone else in your network. There's also several other benefits to networking that tend to be a little less obvious. And to me, the most important one is the potential to increase our productivity. Now, as scientists, we tend to have undergone very extensive and specialized training to work on the current problems that we're trying to solve. And as we branch out and find newer applications or a new direction for our research, it's really beneficial to discuss these ideas and form collaborations with others that have extensive complementary expertise. This saves us time because it would take us a long amount of time to gain that expertise ourselves. And it also can help to distribute the work on a specific project. Now, working on teams also can increase the productivity of our research by having accountability for deadlines and also achieving project goals. And without networking, it can be difficult to find the right type of people for creating effective teams or creating productive collaborations. An additional benefit of networking is having a group that can relate to the many ups and downs that occur in science. I'm sure many of you have had the excitement of having a paper or a grant accepted, and sharing this accomplishment with scientific peers can really enhance our experience. Likewise, when dealing with harsh reviews or grant rejection, a network of scientists who have had that similar shared experience can really be extremely beneficial. This can help with resiliency and also help you address or pivot the project in a way that might be difficult to see if you're struggling with it alone. A network can also help you offer a fresh or different perspective on feedback that you may receive. And sometimes feedback really isn't as harsh as you might think it is by yourself. Now, you may be wondering about what type of networking opportunities exist. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with the ones listed on this slide. This includes formal networking events where the sole purpose is to meet people for the purpose of networking. These typically have structured activities such as speed networking events where you meet another person one-on-one for 1 to 2 minutes before moving on to the next. These are really great, especially if you're new to networking, since you can make a lot of connections in a short amount of time, some of which may be meaningful and some of which won't be. Scientific conferences are also another excellent networking opportunity. If there's no structured networking events within the conference, the coffee breaks and receptions can really serve as opportunities for casual networking. And the poster sessions also serve this, this purpose. And if you're presenting at a poster session, I strongly recommend that you consider having handouts of your poster, and then also maybe some key publications and business cards so that you can leave by your poster when you're away from it, so that people can reach out to you, if they happen to just miss you. Also, large conferences can be a bit overwhelming. So small conferences might be a good target because they're a little more of a close-knit group and a more intimate setting. Workshops are also a really great networking opportunity because you're typically working in small groups and can meet other scientists that have similar but different interests. In addition to those common networking events, there's several other opportunities that you can use to grow your network that occur on quite a regular basis. So some of these include volunteering. You can volunteer for local programs in scientific outreach. It's a great way to meet others that are not necessarily in your direct field of research, but are also scientists or in scientific professions. Scientific conferences can also sometimes have volunteer opportunities. These can include tasks like helping with the registration desk or helping guide attendees to different areas of the conference. And these can be really great opportunities to meet, other volunteers and also conference attendees. There are several other virtual networking opportunities, which include social media such as Twitter. There's several scientists that are very active on Twitter and post their latest work. So if you're not on Twitter, I highly encourage that you create an account and start following some of the key researchers in your direct area of research and also some related areas. There's also LinkedIn, which is another professional network. And of course, there is email. I do feel that email is a little more effective if you know someone who knows someone that can put you in touch with them. And if you do try to network with somebody via email, it's always, I feel, better etiquette to have some purpose or direct ask that they can respond to. And also don't be shy about following up in a week if you don't receive an initial response. Now, there's also chance encounters. So I'd like to share this little story with you. My organization had a ride sharing app where basically when I was commuting up to OHSU, I could put in my commute, say what time I was going up there, and it would connect me with other people that worked at my institution that were also in my area on my way. And this actually led to me meeting a person that later joined my lab because he needed bioinformatics training. And he was a glycobiologist. And I had never thought about glycobiology. I didn't even know what it was. But that chance encounter of us sharing that commute ended up years later resulting in him joining my lab and then also securing funding to explore a new avenue of research, which is looking at the glycobiology of bacteria in the bladder. And it's definitely not an encounter that, or a way that I probably would have saw my research going if it hadn't have been for that chance encounter. So now I'm going to discuss some tips that I have found useful networking, which can really be advantageous if you're like me, you don't happen to have that gift of gab. So regardless of what type of networking event you find yourself in, it can be really helpful to have some of these in the back of your mind and practice them with your peers or your friends beforehand. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with elevator pitches. These are short summaries that allow you to briefly and quickly introduce yourself and your work. I recommend having a few well thought out statements of varying lengths. For example, a simple one-liner I would use is, "Hi, I'm Lisa Karstens. I'm faculty at Oregon Health and Science University, and I study bacteria in the bladder." This is short, sweet, and it contains minimal jargon. Now, if I wanted a slightly lengthier version for someone that's more directly in my field, I might introduce myself as, "Hi, I'm Lisa Karstens. I'm an assistant professor at Oregon Health and Science University. I'm a bioinformaticist, and I study the low microbial biomass bladder microbiome in relation to non-infectious bladder disorders, such as overactive bladder syndrome." This is a little more involved, but it may be appropriate depending on who I'm talking to. It's also a good idea to have a few short and sweet summaries of your current work or projects and recent publications so that they easily roll off your tongue and you don't get too tied into details when talking to somebody that's not directly in your field. You also might want to practice a few key summaries of some key concepts that are in your field if you are like myself or Dr. Sarma, where you're branching out into a new area of research and people might not be familiar with what you do. Now, in addition to introducing yourself and your science, it can also be a good idea to have a few general conversation starters handy to start initiating some small talk. So this is a little easier, I find, at conferences, since you're normally in a new location, right? So an easy opener you could have is, to somebody in line or someone that you just want to strike a conversation with, you could say like, "Oh, hey, I'm new to this town. Do you live here?" And if they don't, you could say, "Oh, it's my first time too. Do you have any recommendations for restaurants? Are you doing any sightseeing?" Right? There's a little bit of an easy conversation starter there that's not necessarily tied immediately to your work. And Virtually, this small talk can be a little more challenging because opportunities don't necessarily present themselves, especially outside of a structured networking activity. Now, I also have some tips on what to avoid when you're trying to start some of these conversations and initially trying to network. It's usually beneficial to try to avoid a question that will prompt a one-word answer. So in this example, instead of asking someone, "Are you enjoying the conference?" Which can easily be answered with a yes or no response, which would end the conversation, you can ask, "What was your favorite part of the conference?" which is a little more engaging and also open-ended. Now, similarly, we want to avoid responding with one-word answers, even when it's easy based on the question that you're given. So if you're asked the question, "Are you enjoying the conference?" you could easily just say yes. But instead, it would be beneficial to say, "Yes, my favorite session was that last one. What was yours?" So here you're engaging a little more, and then you're also returning and following up with a question, which kind of can be a segue into a conversation. Now, while we don't necessarily want to be short with our responses, we also want to make sure that we're keeping the dialogue open so it doesn't become a one-sided monologue. Similarly, if you notice that other people happen to be around you when you're in a networking situation, feel free to take an opportunity to try to bring them in and have them join the conversation as well. Now, finally, if you feel you made a connection when you were networking, it's a great idea to exchange contact information, which is easiestly done with business cards. You can see if your institution will provide you with some business cards, or you can use several online resources to order a small number to bring with you. And on your business card, you want to keep it a little simple, but you want it to stand out too. So you might want to have your name, nice, big and bold, and you might want to have your area of research or career, your current position in academics listed on there. And then you also want to have your email address, which you should use a general one if you're finishing up your PhD or your postdoc and might be changing email addresses soon. You can also add your Twitter handle and a professional website if you have one. Also, make sure that if you end a connection with an action item, such as discussing a paper and saying like, "Oh yeah, I'll send you this paper, I think you'll really enjoy it," make sure you actually follow through on that, because that can help reinforce that connection that you made. Another easy way to reinforce a connection or follow up is to follow someone on Twitter or send a message on LinkedIn. So in summary, there's several reasons that you may want to grow your network beyond the obvious need that you might have in mind. And also you want to get started with networking very early in your career, as Dr. Sarma said as well. In addition to the obvious networking events, networking can occur honestly anywhere. So if you have active networking in mind, it is also a good idea to have a few planned phrases and summaries that will allow you to quickly introduce yourself and your work and any key concepts that you think people that you're trying to reach out to might not understand. Also in networking, try to keep an open conversation and avoid one-word answers or questions that will prompt them. Also be prepared to exchange information and follow up if you left the encounter with an action item. And then I also have a link here to additional tips that's from science.org about how to build your network. And this has actually an extensive amount of information and even some articles about the science behind networking. So it's a great resource. So I hope some of these tips will help you as you're approaching networking, and thank you for your attention. I look forward to the panel discussion.
So we have one more speaker for today, or one more panelist, and this is Dr. Nicole Denisco. She obtained her bachelor's and her PhD from MIT, and her PhD was in molecular biology. She then moved on to do her postdoctoral experience at the University of Texas at Southwestern Medical Center, and she currently is assistant professor of biological science at the University of Texas at Dallas. So she focuses mainly on urinary tract recurrence in postmenopausal women, and she focuses that on the genitourinary microbiome and host inflammation. And it's a genitourinary, it's always a mouthful, that one. Dr. Denisco?
Hi, everyone. So yeah, I'm at the earlier career stage here, as I started my lab in 2018 in October, and I was able to get, a good year in with like normal networking before the big pandemic hit, of course, and that has complicated a lot of networking and forming collaborations for us early career investigators. So today I was just going to go over some of the networking challenges that early career scientists face, and I think everyone from the level of grad student to postdocs, even to assistant professors such as myself are feeling these really right now, and have been feeling them for the past couple of years. I was going to go over kind of four major challenges to networking for early career scientists. So I think one that's been looming, of course, is the COVID-19 pandemic, which has had a huge impact on in-person networking. And if you get anything from this talk, I just want you to let you know that if you're feeling those effects, you're not alone in that. I know that there are many of us out there, including me, that have felt those effects and not being able to attend in-person conferences and things like that for a couple years, and some of us not even feeling comfortable doing that still. So that's posed a big challenge because we can't discuss our science in ways that we're used to in in-person conferences, at poster sessions, making informally meeting people, or having your PI introduce you to people who you should meet, which was really integral for me as a graduate student in learning how to actually network and form a collaboration, which I was lucky enough to be able to start getting practical experience doing that in graduate school, where I had a mentor who trusted me to build and maintain my own collaborations, and that's really helped me throughout my career. But that's much more difficult now. If we're trending towards more in-person conferences, but I know a lot of us are still not comfortable with that. And then another challenge is coming from a different field of research, and I think our other panelists have maybe experienced this as well, where and this was certainly true for me. I've kind of changed field of research at every point in my career. As a graduate student, I worked on rhizobia legume symbiosis, which is very different now than working on recurrent urinary tract infections in the urinary microbiome. And in my postdoc, I worked on Vibrio pathogenesis, which can actually give you great insight into problems, because you gather a large amount of knowledge in different fields that you can apply to your new field. But it also brings the challenge of nobody knowing who you are in your new field. When you enter a new field, you're the new kid on the block, and it makes it difficult to network because you don't have existing networks there. And so that's certainly a challenge that a lot of us face entering into new fields. And it is a challenge, but I wouldn't let that discourage you from entering a new field if that's what you're interested in and that's what you want to do, because there are, of course, solutions to these challenges, which I'll go over on the next slide. Another challenge that I have faced is kind of existing on a scientific island. So what this means to me is where you're at a university where not many other scientists do what you do, where they don't study the same problem that you study. So there are great centers where you have tons of labs all working on a very similar problem, and they can easily network and collaborate and do a lot of great work. But then there are those of us who are interested in a certain field, and maybe we don't have other people in our department that are necessarily performing that research, and maybe we don't have a lot of people even at universities within the vicinity that are performing that kind of research. And so that can make it really difficult to network and to find collaborators in your field, and to kind of make yourself a little more well known in your field, so that you can build a better network. So that's certainly a challenge, and I'll address some potential solutions to that challenge on the next slide. And then the fourth kind of major challenge, which I think was talked about a little bit already, but it's a major one for me, and so I wanted to discuss it here, is being an introvert. So, being an introvert can make networking very tiring and very difficult. And it's not that you don't want to do it, it's just that it takes a lot of energy to do that. And, you're just not naturally someone who will go up to a person that they don't know at all and want to start a conversation. And so, luckily, a lot of scientists are introverts. So if you feel it's difficult for you to go strike up a conversation with someone else that you never met, but you are having common research interests, they might be an introvert too. But this is a major issue and can make it really scary if you're going to a big conference, especially, and you're trying to network, but but your natural introvertedness is making that difficult for you. So for all challenges, of course, there are solutions. So I came up with a couple solutions for these potential challenges that you might face. So in terms of the impact of COVID-19 on our ability to network in person, one of the things that's been really helpful to me is attending online conferences and online forums and discussion groups. And so, yes, when you're online, it's much more difficult to actually network because you're watching a computer screen, and even like at online conferences, you're not really asking a question, maybe you're typing it into a chat box. So that can make it difficult to network. But I found some of the online discussions that we had, especially that CAIRIBU has so graciously hosted, have really been helpful because they're more informal ways to communicate. But it's really important that if you are at one of those online forums where you're discussing a certain research topic with others in your field, that you participate in the discussion. And it can be very scary to do that as an early career scientist when you have a lot of heavy hitters that are also in that discussion. But for me, I just tell myself that my thoughts matter, my expertise is there, and you got to put your imposter syndrome to the side as much as you can, at least in that moment, and really just assert yourself. And if you have something to say, go ahead and say it, because that's how people get to know who you are, is if they hear you say your ideas, right? And so that's something that you can take advantage of. And then, as we go more into in-person conferences, again, as the other panelists have mentioned, you really just have to be active and ask questions when you're attending a talk, and you raise your hand, go up to that microphone, even though it might be scary, and really put yourself out there, go to the poster sessions and interact with the trainees even. They're often a great starting point to make a collaboration, and things like that. As to the challenge of being new to the field, for me, what helped me was really just doing my homework and reading a lot. So whenever you go into a new field, you have to, your first kind of step is to read and make yourself as familiar with the literature of that field. But also you need to know who's working in that field, right? So who's currently working in that field. And so reading their work and looking at their websites and then seeing, making sure and looking at their current publications to make sure they're still working in that field, because scientists like to change topics. And then if you find someone that is working on a similar problem as you, and might be a potential collaborator, reach out to them. I mean, you can send them an email. It might be scary to do that, to just send a cold email, but that's something that I've done, and it can actually work out for you. Or just do your homework and know who you should be reaching out to when you go to a conference, if you want to wait till you have that in-person interaction, or if you're participating in an online forum that they're participating in. Or you can again use social media, which is really a good solution solution for those of us who might be introverts, because it's a lot easier to have a conversation, kind of more anonymously online or on Twitter than it might be to actually go in person and talk to people. And so that could be a good place, at least where you can break the ice and launch off. And then as far as being on a scientific island, so that can be really challenging, because you can feel like how can you really compete with these big centers that have 10 labs in one institution that are doing the research that are very similar, that's along the lines of yours, and you're just one person on an island. So what I've done is kind of work to bring in scientists that are around me that are not currently working in my field into my field. And so that's been something that's been great for me, being at a university where we have chemists and mathematicians and all sorts of scientists from different fields, where we can see what solutions these researchers have in their research and how that can apply to your research, and that can help you form more interdisciplinary collaborations, which I'll talk about on the next slide. And then hopefully some of the the solutions that I talked about for the other 2 points could help you also, make connections that can help you get off your island, where you can form collaborations with those scientists who are at, institutions where they might have more labs doing similar research. And then the last kind of solutions to how to network as an introvert. For me, it was all about practice, like starting to practice as a graduate student and starting to know your limits of when you were feeling overwhelmed and when you were, ready, like how much rest you needed between interactions. So you might have a conference that lasts for a week, right? And as an introvert, it sounds terrifying to have to be constantly on and networking during that entire week-long period. So plan breaks for yourself and really attend the sessions that have the people who you really need to network with and meet, or who's the science that you really want to see. But don't be afraid to plan breaks for yourself so that you can recover. You don't have to overwhelm yourself, because that never really works out very well. And then of course use social media. Again, that's a great place for introverts to make connections. It's just, for me, it's a lot easier to start a conversation that way. And so those are some solutions that I have and are helpful to discuss anymore. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about was how to form and maintain interdisciplinary collaborations. This is kind of where I have the most expertise, is, you, us working in science today, right, as the other panelists have mentioned, you can't work by yourself. Like, there's the scientific problems that we're trying to solve are too complex and too big to really have one person, one lab be the one to solve the problem, right? So what's really necessary in a lot of different research avenues, but especially like in microbiome research, for example, is to have an interdisciplinary team, because you as a scientist, even though you're great and you have all this experience, you do not have every single piece of expertise that's necessary to actually create a useful and insightful research product. So, the first step for me when I'm like looking at a project that I think I might need collaborators on is to identify my own weaknesses or areas where I lack expertise. So, if I have an interesting research problem that I want to build a project around, first I look at myself and I say, where are my weak spots? Where do I need someone to help fill in those spots to make this project better? And then, you also need to identify your strengths, just so you don't get too down on yourself. But but you also need to do that so you can be ready to articulate when you're approaching a potential collaborator what you can bring to the project, right? Because, you have to not only convince them that the project is interesting, but that you are the right person to collaborate with on the project. And then so once you've done these things, you can kind of look for others with expertise in the areas that you lack, which, it might be difficult if you don't know already who might be those people. And so for me, something that's worked is reaching out on social media, being like, hey, does anybody know someone with expertise in this? And then having people within my network already reach out to me and be like, yeah, they're here. I know this person who has expertise in diagnostic devices or whatnot, and then going ahead and contacting that person. So kind of using your network, your existing network to help you find people who might be able to fill in your weak spots. And then reaching out to them, right? So, there are options for reaching out to them. My favorite is just to email them, just to send them an email. If they don't respond to your first email, you can send a follow-up email. Don't send a crazy amount of emails, but realize that people are busy and that they might not respond right away. And then once you've kind of formed a collaboration and you've agreed to work on this project together, you want to set, clear expectations from the get-go, from the start, about what the expected contributions are, what the authorship, what ideas for authorship might be, or if you're going to write a grant together, who's going to be COI, PI, things like that. And then of course, budgetary expectations. So all those things you want to set up front. You never want to leave those until last minute, until you're, the paper's written and now you're arguing over authorship. That's never a good way to go about it. So if you're clear and upfront with your expectations from the beginning, you can avoid a lot of problems. And then of course, meeting and keeping in contact regularly. So one of the really, I guess, the things that has, we've benefited from during this time is, the prevalence of using Zoom and Teams and all of these ways to have video conferences where it makes it easy to keep in contact regularly. So with my collaborators that I have on grants, especially if the grant on funded grants, I meet with them every week. And so I have these meetings over Zoom or Teams if I can't have them in person, and keeping that regular contact, even if you don't have a full hour meeting, even if it's a short meeting, it just keeps that relationship going, and it makes sure that you're meeting the milestones that you need to meet for the project. And then, of course, the last thing for me is keeping records of your communications and the collaborative product. So you always want to make sure you also have physical records of your agreements, of your communications, and of all of the products of your collaboration. So with that, I probably went over time, and I will let the next person talk.
Thank you so much. There was a lot of stuff I could relate to, so I very much enjoyed your talk there. We have a couple minutes left for question and answers. So if anybody has questions that they would like to ask, then I don't think there's anyone in the chat box, but I definitely have a question. So if I don't have anybody who has one in mind. So social media is obviously becoming a lot more of a popular platform. And some people might be more well versed in this area than others. What would your recommendations be if you are relatively new to social media as to how to go about it and what type of things to post? And would you think it better to focus on LinkedIn or maybe on Twitter? What would your advice be?
It's interesting because I think I was just chatting with Christina too. I think it would be great to have someone who's an expert come and present on how to use Twitter, how to use it effectively. I'll tell you, beyond just networking, at least at the University of Michigan now, for some of our promotions, we are including as part of our regional and national reputation, social media, and if there is social media presence. And so it's moving beyond just using it as a tool to get to know each other. It's actually, I think, going to start to become more and more important in terms of ascertaining what your impact is. So I think it's a skill set that we will have to learn to some extent how much you use it based on where you're at in your career and what you want to do it for. I think would vary, but I think it would be wonderful if we could find a way to present good Twitter skills.
Thanks for that. I have a question here from Michael Nugent. He would love to hear from the speakers about the philosophies of saying no in their networking.
You mean saying no to requests for?
Yeah, I think that's what he means is, you obviously can't do everything and participate in everything.
Yeah.
So in what extent is it a bad thing to say no? This might be more related depending on your stage in your career, obviously. So as you're further advanced, saying no would likely be easier. In the beginning, probably not as much. So maybe Dr. Denisco, maybe you've been in a situation where you've had to say no before, or were tempted to say no, but maybe couldn't.
Oh, well, I'm his advisor, so
Okay.
he probably has already heard from me on this, but yeah, maybe. I think Lisa was gonna say something. She looked like she was gonna say something.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's a few different reasons you might have to say no to something, whether it be a networking event or like, a request. So one thing I find a little challenging is when people send me an email and it's not really clear why they sent it. That also makes it hard to say no. But aside from that, I mean, I think if you're looking for like what networking opportunities should you like take advantage of or maybe deprioritize, I typically try to set a goal. It used to be a minimum, now it's kind of a maximum, right? So I only have the bandwidth to do, 1 or 2 networking events in a given month. And that's now my maximum. It used to be that I had a minimum where I was like, I need to make sure that I am, trying to reach outside of my current social bubble at least once a week, right? And that might seem a little aggressive, but I was trying to, explore different options earlier in my career. And that's, what I wanted to have as a minimum. You can also kind of have like a priority chart. So if there are certain opportunities that, might be a little more beneficial for you, either because they're a smaller group and that's what you're looking for, or because it's a larger one, you can try to weigh them with each other if they happen to conflict with each other in scheduling. In terms of collaborations, like that, it can be hard to say yes and to say no, because sometimes, you just don't have the bandwidth at the time. So sometimes it's the wrong time. So you're just like, well, you don't have bandwidth. Maybe in the future you would want to pursue that networking opportunity or that collaboration or something like that. So I hope that I answered his question.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Brooks, did you have a question?
I didn't. I was just going to add to that conversation. For a young person, I would say no to things that don't advance your career. Your job is to get your research up and running, build those networks. And if they're calling on you to do some nonsense, committee work, say no to it. The other thing is when people contact you about collaborations, if you can, due diligence on them. If a person is known to be a bad person that uses people, then that's appropriate to say no. The other thing is know what your promotions process is. So at Michigan, it's interesting they're using social media as a potential metric. We do not. I was associate dean also, so I know about promotion. I did promotion stuff here. We don't take that into account, but if your place does, then that's appropriate. If you are going to use social media, which I don't, so I don't have no expertise, but I'll talk about it anyway, I would be purposeful about it. Certainly, don't use it just to be known. Because I have seen young people get lost posting all the time. You got to do work too. So, but if it's useful for making connections of potential research collaborations, or to get known by senior faculty at other places who are going to be writing your letters of recommendation for promotion, you betcha. If you get asked to go to another university, give a talk, absolutely say yes. And when you're there, take that opportunity to network. Do your research before you go. Who's there that you want to meet? Who are the gray hairs in the front row of the audience? Make sure you figure out who they are and set up meetings with them when you visit another university, because they're going to be your letter writers for promotion. And the only other thing is, just be a good collaborator. It should be fun, first of all. So make sure you're having some fun. You should learn from each other. And you should also deliver. And that's one thing I have seen is that, people enter a collaboration and then they, are spotty at answering email or getting their share of the work done. Be a good collaborator. Make sure you are, because that gets out on the network. The final thing I'll say is final two things I'll say is, first of all, there are natural networks out there. Look at people who trained at your place, maybe even with your own advisor years before. It's a natural group of people to reach out to. And some of the old people, when I first started my career, old people who trained in residency at Hopkins were very, very helpful to me. That's kind of a natural network. And the final thing I'll say is the senior faculty at in your institution, especially in your own department, part of their job is to build your career. Don't forget that. So talk to the senior faculty members at your place and see if they can get you involved in a consortium or, some other, or introduce you to something. So it's their obligation to help you. You're not begging them for that. That's part of their job. So I'm going to stop there.
Well, thank you very much for your input. I see that we have Dr. Lam on the call as well. I think she's very experienced in the field. So maybe Dr. Lam, would you have some good advice for our trainees?
So I think that some of what James said was incredibly important. I'm now an associate dean for faculty affairs, maybe similar. I don't know, James, to what you did, but I think that, first of all, you obviously need a good mentor to guide you, but you also need to know all the rules and how to get yourself promoted and how to not waste your time, on things that don't help your career. And of course, for the clinicians also, how not to waste your time clinically, right, on things that are perhaps not revenue generating or busy work, if you can avoid it. But I think that in terms of the networking, so of course, when I was younger, we didn't ever think about networking or use those words or the mentor word. Like, I never knew I was a mentor until I got a prize for it. And but like at meetings, I went, and the first meeting I went to, I was all by myself, which was not a whole lot of fun. And so then I just afterwards I decided, well, if I want to meet people and do things, then I should be inclusive about things. So I would always set up dinners every night that we didn't have some event to do. And I would invite everybody under the sun, people I knew, people I didn't know, tell them to bring friends, just tell me how many. But it was a great way then to interact socially with, and many times, leaders in the field who maybe didn't have something to do either, and I would always be inclusive, even for people once I was kind of more established, that maybe they weren't my favorites, but I felt that I didn't like being by myself, for the evening, and they wouldn't either. So I had no limits, but it was a great way then to meet people, but I didn't do it with any ulterior motive, and it was self-serving to begin with. But then, everybody had fun and really enjoyed it. And so I think that, and I use that only as an example of having an interaction that is informal and maybe with not the motivation for the networking, but it leads to networking in very powerful ways because you have that human interaction rather than just even the scientific one. And I can't tell you there's a science behind that. I'm saying strategy, and it was nothing I did on purpose, but in the long run, it made a huge difference. And then if I could just go on for a second, because I know we're over time, I think that, the other way to network very effectively is, for the affiliated societies, say in the AUA, right, or some of the other groups that we're members of, when they have a banquet or some type of a event, whether it's a breakfast, whatever it is, women don't do a good job, and I know there's men here too, but women in particular don't do a good job about attending these things, right? And they may eat in their room or something like that. And yet, again, that is the perfect place to make yourself known and seen, but also just to interact, right, with leaders in the field in a very comfortable way, because it's not meant to be anything powerful or stressful. It's meant to be, a nice event for the people with that specialty. So I think that all those things are important. But again, I don't know that there's any studies to support it, but it certainly has worked for me. Is that okay, Bernadette?
Yeah, thank you so much for your input. That's
Okay.
very much appreciated. I would like to thank all our panelists for all the wonderful advice in their talks. And I'm sure the trainees will take this home, think about it, and see how they can best implement this in their career path.